Mark, the 16th chapter. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices, so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The Gospel of our Lord. I know there should be trumpets, drums, guitars, voices lifted to the ceiling. A joyous, full-throated shout that the old adversary death has met its match. But not this time. Not today. We've done our best to fill the internet with a thunderous expression of joy, but in many ways this Easter is destined to be strangely quiet, like the first Easter. Aside from the earthquake proclaimed in Matthew that accompanied the stone being rolled away, that day was oddly quiet. A revolution of new life begun in a quiet space, catching Mary Magdalene and the women completely off guard, by surprise. The journey of Christ, which began in a humble manger, a journey of new life, has come to this peaceful garden. Again, far from the crowds, far from the fanfare. Jesus does not appear in the temple demanding applause. He does not come to Pilate or Herod to proclaim his victory. Most would have taken this opportunity to face down their enemies, to show them who's boss, to tell them that right now it might be a good idea to kneel. But Jesus isn't like most. He comes to his friends, the ones he loves, stands before them and gently tells them, even as they can scarcely believe their eyes, it's okay. It's okay, and it's always going to be okay. Love does not die, and God is love. We find ourselves in the midst of a terrible time in our world. We are told to stay away from each other, to sanitize, to avoid breathing the same air, to not touch. And there is pain and suffering, death and fear. A lot of fear. What will the future bring? Will my loved ones be all right? Will I be all right? Will things ever be the same? Today, on this quiet Easter, these are the kinds of questions that can ring around the inside of your head. But Jesus stands before us today. He comes to us, and even as we can scarcely believe it, he says the same thing he said to the frightened, trembling women. The women who truly felt that life had, in many ways, ended for them with his last breath on the cross. He stands before us and says, it's okay, and it's always going to be okay. And yes, even as we can scarcely believe it, he reminds us that even in our unbelief, he is. He lives. And his love for us will fill the cracks in our souls and fill us with the breath of his new life. It's okay. I love the trumpets, guitars, and drums, the full-throated cry of the organ playing Vidor's toccata. I miss the vocal thunder of our collected joy shaking the foundations of our church building with a song of praise and love. But it is when the celebration dies down, when we go our separate ways and find ourselves alone in the quiet, that we can hear our God most clearly. In the silence and peace, we can feel our Lord standing nearby and realize most clearly that we are not alone. Jesus was never much for fanfare. His entry into Jerusalem aside, he was much more fond of finding a peaceful place to pray, for healing a person and then telling them not to broadcast it, for starting a revolution with bread and wine over a quiet dinner. He was not one to demand the spotlight, even as it often found him. And I wonder if this part of his revolution, his appearing simply in a garden to his loved ones, is a message to us to not focus too intently on this miracle, but rather to remember that while he has taught us how to die without fear, knowing death is not the end, he mostly came to teach us how to live. He came to teach us how to live, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. As he stands before us in the quiet of the garden, showing the power he chose to display in weakness, he's asking us to resolve to follow and live as he taught. And while the vow to live in this way might indeed come in the trumpet-filled joy of a celebration, we know that the decision of how we will live is always, in the end, a matter of quiet resolve. A decision we make again and again when our spirit asks the question, will you be true to your Master? Will you be true to the Holy One who calls you friend? In this quiet Easter, resolve that the answer will be yes, and remember that even in our unbelief, he holds our hands, he holds our hearts. It's okay. It will always be okay. God is love. Love never dies.